Welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts Podcast. My name's Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs and try to do those things more responsibly. Welcome back to another one of my monologue videos. In the last couple weeks, I've been having conversations and talking about religious exploration and deconstruction, and I've been thinking a lot about that lately. Like, what is deconstruction? Have I defined it well in sort of the grand scope of what I'm doing and how I'm talking about it within this little series or whatever you want to call it? And I figured maybe I should try tackling that a little bit and not try to be an authority because I don't think I'm an authority on the subject, but trying to kind of unpack how I'm seeing it and how it's playing within the world or in our culture, I guess in the world too, but within our culture specifically. I want to touch too a little bit on, where we're aiming that. But first, I want to start talking about the definitions. And I think sometimes there are people who understand and know what deconstruction is, but there's a lot of people who sort of have never heard the term. They don't understand the space. So throughout the weeks, as I was trying to kind of figure out how's a good way to describe deconstruction, I went and just looked up the definitions. And I kind of want to read them to you because I think it's very interesting because I don't think it quite hits exactly what most people within the religious deconstruction space are necessarily trying to convey when they're talking about deconstruction. So the first definition that came up, I think this is just from dictionary.com, but deconstruction, a method of critical analysis of philosophical and literary language which emphasizes the internal workings of language and conceptual systems, the relation quality of meaning, and the assumption implicit in forms of expression. Deconstruction focuses on a text as such rather than an expression of the author's intentions, stressing the limitations or impossibility of interpretation and rejecting the Western philosophical tradition of seeking certainty through reasoning by privileging certain types of interpretations and repressing others. It was effectively named and popularized by the French philosopher Jacques Derrida from the late 1960s and taken up particularly by the U.S. literary critics. Now, when I read that, there's some pieces of that seem to kind of correlate with this religious deconstruction in the space that a lot of ex-Christians or struggling Christians find themselves in, but it didn't quite hit the tone of what it seems to me people are trying to communicate through deconstruction. So from there, I found another website that gave 5 different definitions of deconstruction, sort of the 5 top, and I'll read those for you. Deconstruction is defined as a way of analyzing literature that assumes the text cannot have fixed meaning. An example of deconstruction is reading a novel twice, 20 years apart, and seeing how it has a different meaning each time. The second, a philosophical movement and theory of literary criticism that questions traditional assumptions about certainty, identity, and truth, asserts that words can only refer to other words, and attempts to demonstrate how statements about any text subvert their own meanings. 3. An analytic method, especially of literary criticism, originated in France in the mid-20th century and based on a theory that by the very nature of language and usage, no text can have a fixed, coherent meaning. 4. The destroying or taking apart of an object, disassembly. And then 5, a philosophical theory of textual criticism, a form of critical analysis. Now, again, all of these definitions sort of, I feel like, have some sort of like touch to what people are really trying to get out from deconstruction, but it doesn't really get to the core of what I think people are communicating. And so I kept digging and I looked up Christian deconstruction. And I came up with some Medium article that had a definition of deconstruction that I feel like really hit the nail on the head of what I believe most people are trying to communicate when they're saying they're going through a deconstruction period, at least in that religious or Christian context. And I'll read that for you now. In short, faith deconstruction is the systematic pulling apart of one's belief system for examination. For Christians, that can mean a wide array of questioning ranging from theological to the practical. It can mean questioning the supposed inerrancy of the Bible, the culture and traditions of their church, the the particular application or misapplication of the gospel, and much more. Faith deconstruction can begin at many different points for many different reasons. Doubt is what drives faith deconstruction. The question underneath all the other questions is relatively straightforward. Can I trust my beliefs and the way I operate in them anymore? So in that frame, it's very different than sort of not being able to trust the meaning of a text or something within that. Although I think some people who are deconstructing might find themselves in that place, but it is more of this dismantling and unpacking of the packaged faith that many people were given. And it's this process of reevaluating and reframing the things that someone always knew and believed to be true. And I know for myself and for many others, that's a process that came in a way that wasn't even expected, or it wasn't something that was being sought after, but naturally came through the experience of the world and just sort of this interaction with the realities that lie inside and outside of our own little communities. And there's a level in which this sort of deconstruction, this pulling apart of faith, is really feared by some in religious communities. And on one hand, that's very understandable. If you believe in the truth of a religion or a faith and you see your young people or your friends, your children, whoever it is, this important person in your life, questioning those things and potentially walking away from those things, it's easy to see why there's a concern for that and a fear for that, especially if you really deeply believe that it's true. Yet there's another part of that where that questioning and that toiling and that digging to try to understand what is true and what we believe is so important for the embracing of a genuine faith, of something that could be stood on and supported by a person outside of the fact that that's what they were always taught. The hard thing is there's a lot of complications and bad attitudes toward deconstruction on either side of the extreme that create a somewhat negative outlook and participation within deconstruction. On one end, we have people so fearful of it that they choose not to acknowledge it at all and say that there's anything helpful about it, or even sort of try to suppress it and keep people from doing those sort of things. And then there's this other side where it's, I would say, almost irresponsible deconstruction, where there's a pulling apart and a throwing away and a lack of intentionality of the things that we're questioning and how to really participate in that well. And both of these sort of extremes feed on each other to create an even bigger problem in the realm of deconstruction. Now, as a religious person myself, I tend to not be on this sort of side of the spectrum where I fear deconstruction. I actually don't. I think there's a lot of things that are important to it. However, I also don't align too far on the other end to say that every type of deconstruction is positive and beautiful. I think sometimes deconstruction is necessary, but I sometimes worry, what is the aim of this? Where are we going with this sort of pattern and this participation in deconstruction? And what I've started to notice, especially in new media and like social media culture, is a sort of a pride and a platform of proud deconstruction. So I am definitely not against deconstruction, and I can understand those platforms where people want to promote that, because even for myself, there was a process in the deconstruction that was very helpful, challenging for sure, and sometimes torturous, but very helpful in reframing and feeling a confidence in the way I lived my life, how I operated in the world, and how I interacted with others, or how I interacted with information, and how I could use that and change my modes and my models to be better and to have a better sense of reality. But what I start to fear about creating a platform on this taking apart is that eventually you just continue taking apart. There's nothing left to stand on. And I think too far down that line of deconstructing, you start to build a level of uncertainty that creates more chaos than is probably beneficial. And of course, sometimes the world is chaotic, and there are times where we have to embrace that chaos and that lack of control and that uncertainty to realize how small we are. Yet there has to be something to ground us, to help us continue moving forward in a way that is beneficial to society, is beneficial to ourselves and our own small local connections, and keep us grounded mentally for the long term. And too much praise of this deconstruction for deconstruction's sake seems to me to probably lead to somewhere that's not going to be very good. So that leaves me with the question of, where do we go? Like, what are we deconstructing for? And for me, I think that answer is reconstruction. How are we using this taking apart and this unpacking of these ideas and these beliefs, and using that process to then help us rebuild to something better, to something truer, to something that is more effective in helping us navigate the craziness and the uncertainty of the world that we find ourselves in. And you can't have reconstruction without deconstruction. And so these two things go hand in hand, but they need to work in harmony with each other. Because if we have just simple deconstruction, we'll just be continuing to take away the bricks until we're left with nothing. But if it's simple reconstruction, there's a huge potential of us building on top of something that is unsound to begin with. And so how do we find that balance to learn how to work within ourselves, but also within communities, to come to better answers to questions and participate in this sort of death and rebirth of ideas, where we're dying to these old things or these old beliefs that are perceived to have flaws, and examine that and do the intentional work to then take these questions and these uncertainties and move that towards something more beneficial for yourself and your communities and the generations coming after us. I think for a long time I struggled to be confident in a journey of reconstruction and feel good about coming to strong beliefs about things or new ideas and feeling settled in them. And I think there will always be ups and downs as I continue down this journey. But I think there's a lot in which I've learned that helped me to grow in this aspect. I think I'm really learning to trust myself again, and how to stand for things, and how to give more people grace as they go through their own journeys, or as they stand confidently for the things that they believed, and be more genuinely open to hearing those things, even if I think they're wrong, and learning how to see people as people, and see the way all of the full scope of the way we participate in these questions affects something so much bigger than my own little world. So I think for myself, my aim for deconstruction is to find that happy medium of participating in deconstruction in a healthy way, to really question myself and my perceived idea of beliefs, and hopefully through that process continue to gain knowledge and regain a confidence in myself and in my journey of trying to understand beliefs and how we hold those well to build something better. I think in a Christian frame, this idea of death and rebirth is so prominent. Yet there's something about this idea of death and rebirth of ideas and beliefs and concepts within the faith that's very scary. I think on whatever end of like the spectrum you have of deconstruction, whether you're very against it, very for it, or somewhere in the middle, there's this question and this concern of how do we learn how to build ideas and hold beliefs that stop us from being deceived, whether that's intentionally or unintentionally. How do we stop ourselves from holding on to things that don't match reality and create negative ripple effects in the world? And I think sometimes that can leave us in this very fearful place and this uncertain place. And through the whole process, get lost in the chaos and the lack of trust in our own judgments and our own processing of these things. And how much of that should we fear? Should we fear our judgment? And should we question ourselves? Sure, but how far does that go? Because of course, we all probably believe things that are wrong. And there's a benefit to questioning ourselves and being open to be proven wrong. Yet sometimes that taken to the extreme can create a wishy-washy perception of the world or leaves you on rocky ground. And there's only so much that you can do in that frame because you're just so afraid to make a choice or stand for anything. And there has to be some happy middle of learning how to be intentional about the way that we're coming to ideas, standing firmly for beliefs, and what we believe to be truth, while still being open to the possibility of something truer. And how do we sense this idea of fullness and clarity within a world? I think the last sort of thing I want to hit on deconstruction too, in this sort of Christian frame, is that this is not just happening to Christians. There are plenty of people who are in other religions or even sort of agnostic or atheists who start to question their own beliefs and try to figure out how to get to truth in these ways. So it's not just a one-sided issue. There's all of this type of deconstruction that's happening. And how do we learn from each other in these sort of modes of deconstruction to work together to help construct to something better? Because we are so limited in our own perceptions that we need other people to help come in and show us the holes in our thinking, show us where we're emotionally dependent on something, or give us a clearer sense of the scope of what it means to be human and what it means to experience reality. And it doesn't mean that we have to do that and placate to everybody and just accept everything as true, but we can learn from each other and I think hopefully move together towards something that is more solid and true. Those are sort of my unfiltered thoughts about deconstruction and reconstruction. And I think ultimately, at the end of all of this, I've realized that as much as I think that deconstruction is a super important part of a faith journey and growing within yourself to learn what you really believe and feel comfortable about what you can hold to be true, I aim for something higher than that. I want to aim towards helping people reconstruct and helping myself reconstruct to something that leaves me more confident and comfortable in the way I operate in the world. And that's not only with the beliefs that I then hold, but the spirit in which I operate with those beliefs and with other people in conversation and dialogue and debate, and how I can be better at testing my own assumptions and standing for truth. while also seeing the beauty in the world and how those things all come together to reflect each other. I think that's where I'm going to leave off. I hope this made sense. I'm probably going to continue thinking and unpacking these things, but more monologues and conversations coming your way. So please subscribe or, leave a comment with what you want to hear if you want to hear more. But with that, I will close with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.